Hello there, thrill seekers. I have just come back from the great state of Texas where I got myself a Buc-ee's shirt. Anybody who's spent time in Texas will probably know what that is, and if you haven't, you're just going to have to go to Texas and find out what Buc-ee's is. I put up something yesterday and it didn't get a lot of views, but maybe it should. It was this interesting movie that a guy named CK put together about my tour of Finland in 2009. He put it together in 2009, and I put it up as my what am I calling Monday Moldy Oldie yesterday, and I think it's pretty good, but it's not getting a lot of views, so I thought I would mention that it's up there, and it's a kind of a neat little film this guy made. It's about half an hour long. Okay, so what was I going to talk about today? Well, I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area over the weekend, and the reason was that my wife graduated. She got her master's in education from a university, one of these online universities called Western Governors University, I think. I think that's the name. Anyway, and they had their graduation ceremony in Frisco, Texas, which is one of the Dallas suburbs. So we went out there, and I've never lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. However, my dad lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for at least 25 years. I'm not sure, he's not there anymore, but a good long time, maybe 30 years. I can't remember exactly when he moved and when he moved away. But I've spent a lot of time in the area, is the point. So we kind of looked around the area. We looked at houses in the area. If anybody's in Dallas-Fort Worth area and wants to talk to me about living there, send me an email to bw@hardcorezen.info. But anyway, so we're thinking about maybe relocating. Haven't decided yet. But one of the things I always did every time I visited my dad in Dallas-Fort Worth area, he lived in Flower Mound, Texas, was go to Kalachanji's. So what is Kalachanji's? Kalachanji's is a Indian restaurant. I guess you'd call it classified under the rubric or whatever, Indian restaurant. But it's run by the Hare Krishnas, and it's in the Hare Krishna temple. It's kind of adjacent to the Hare Krishna temple there in Dallas. And we'd always go there, and my dad liked the food. He's not a vegetarian, but he liked Kalachanji's food because he loves Indian food. So I'd always make it a point to go there, and we went there this weekend on Sunday. I guess we went there, and it was real good, and I highly recommend it. The line was pretty long, but it moved fast, and because they do buffet style. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my association with the Hare Krishna movement. So that's a long intro to tell you about that. And I've mentioned this here and there. I know I put it in Hardcore Zen and maybe some other my books. I was never an initiate into the Hare Krishna movement, so and there's no dramatic story to tell, which is why I've kind of not told it, because maybe it's not that interesting, but it might be interesting enough to make a video out of, so I'll tell you. So when I first started trying to get into religion, I don't come from a religious background. My family had no real fixed religion. We were vaguely Protestant, but I started out by watching televangelists on TV, because I didn't know. I was like in 6th or 5th grade even, and I started watching Channel 17 in Canton, Ohio, which was the religious station, just to try to figure out what this religion stuff was, because I had no idea. And so I got a sense of what they were all about, what fundamentalist Christians were all about, and I could see that it wasn't for me. But that's deep background on what I want to say about the Hare Krishnas. So I knew I was interested in Indian religion, and the easiest way to read about Indian religion in this is like late 1970s in rural Ohio, were the books published by the Hare Krishnas, the Hare Krishna movement. Because they would show up at thrift stores and used bookstores and things, and I used to buy them and look at them and read them occasionally. And I had a pretty good collection at one time, but all I've got left is two. This one, Bhagavad Gita as it is, which is sort of the main book of the Hare Krishna movement. I liked this one because it's made to look like one of these Bibles with the fake leather cover and stuff like that. And then I still have my copy of this book, Chant and Be Happy, which contains some of their stuff with John Lennon and George Harrison, which was one of the reasons I got into the movement as much as I did in the first place. And also, I don't have the LP anymore, but I still have the CD of the Radha Krishna Temple album, which is a really good album produced by George Harrison of the Hare Krishna chants and stuff. And there's a lot of good videos on YouTube about the Hare Krishna movement. I just watched a couple this morning in preparation for this, so I'm not going to try to give you the capsule history of the movement. If you have no idea what the Hare Krishna movement is, then you're just going to have to look elsewhere for that. So I'm going to skip all that. But they are part of a Hindu religious tradition of bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga means yoga where you worship God as kind of I was going to say object. It's not an object. You worship him as a person, as someone other than you. Whereas somebody like Nisargadatta Maharaj, who I talk about, is part of the jnana yoga, where you try to have the internal knowledge of God yourself. Although Nisargadatta Maharaj also practiced bhakti yoga. He also did basically the same thing that the Hare Krishnas do, which is they chant Hare Krishna and offer devotional service there. And the thing that interested me about the Hare Krishna movement was, of course, it's very successful in the West and the United States in particular, but all over the West. And here's a good book. Hard to find and expensive when you come across it, but I think this is a very worthwhile book that examines the entire history of the movement in a really fair way, without being so steeped in the movement that they can't be objective about it, but without being so objective about it that they end up just sort of trashing the movement. I think it's a pretty good book and very realistic about it. But one of the things they don't say, and the thing that I noticed about them, so this is why I'm making this video, is I told you I'd understood what the fundamentalist Christian movement was about. And then I started getting the Hare Krishnas. And what I saw in the Hare Krishnas seemed to me like, I think this is at least one of the reasons that they're so successful, is because they are basically the same thing as fundamentalist Christianity. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. For fundamentalist Christians, the Bible is literally true. So if it says God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, that means 6 24-hour periods, and no more, no less. And if it says there was a flood and Noah had an ark full of animals on it, then there was really a boat with animals on it, and so on and so forth. Moses really had tablets with the 10 Commandments on them and the whole bit. Everything is literally true. And this is the approach that the Hare Krishna movement, particularly their founder, Srila Prabhupada, there's his picture there, he takes the same approach to Hindu scriptures. And I'll give you an example. So Bhagavad Gita is this story. It's excerpted from the Mahabharata, this great epic story of lots of stuff happening. And, I don't have to exactly, maybe this picture will show you. So in the Mahabharata, there is this scene in which Krishna, who is the incarnation of God, is with Arjuna, and they're going to a battlefield. And because of all the other things that happen in the epic before this point, Arjuna has to wage a battle against his family, basically. And he is he's in this chariot with God, Krishna, who is God there, and there's 5 horses. And one of the normal ways of explaining what the Bhagavad Gita is about is to say it's a metaphor. So the chariot is being drawn by 5 horses, and the 5 horses, it is said, represent the 5 senses. And Krishna represents the godly element that is in all of us, and Arjuna represents the soul, the jiva, the individual Atman, who is sort of in conflict with the higher self. Krishna representing the higher self in the 5 senses, and the battle represents a battle that is waged when we battle with the world. We sort of have that, it's us against the world kind of thing. Life, But if you read the Hare Krishnas, it's 5 horses, and Krishna is God, and he's in there, and this battle really happened, and Arjuna was a real person, and Krishna was a real person, and forget all the metaphors. It's all literally true, and that's how we understand this, as literal truth. So I think that's one of the reasons that the Hare Krishna movement was so successful in America, is because it was very easy for Americans to relate to it, because it's something they were familiar with. It's an approach that they were familiar with, but just transferred onto a different religion. And I had this idea at one time that I would write this theory up, and I had this idea like 30 years ago, and I still haven't written it up. But there you go. There's my idea. As for my personal involvement with the movement, I never got that deeply into it, but I used to go to their cooking classes. I've gone to the temple worship services a lot of times, chanted Hare Krishna and jumped up and down. I became a vegetarian. I don't know if it wasn't because I was becoming a Hare Krishna devotee, but the sort of vegetarianism that I followed was basically theirs, except they don't eat eggs and I eat eggs, so I didn't follow that part. But it's a really interesting sort of discipline. So there's two things I want to talk about: discipline and belief. So let's talk about discipline first. I think the discipline is also one of the things that makes the Hare Krishna movement attractive, because you're supposed to follow. I don't remember them all, and like I say, you can watch videos where they'll show you all of them. But there's certain disciplines. You're supposed to abstain from eating meat, fish, or eggs. Abstain from any illicit sex, which means sex that's not intended to produce children. You can't have any intoxicants, and you can't gamble, which I always find interesting that they throw gambling in there. But maybe this is a bigger problem in India than it is in America. And of course, people have gambling addictions here too, but still, it seems like to elevate that to religious status always seems funny to me. And the other thing is, if you're a temple person, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and you go do a worship service, and you're supposed to, throughout the day, chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra 16 rounds. So you're supposed to chant it 108 times, and that's one round, and you're supposed to do that 16 times, and apparently it takes like 1.5 to 2 hours per day, and so it's a real discipline, and I think people are very attracted to that. And I found interesting parallels, because of course Buddhism comes out of the same tradition of, the same soil of tradition. I don't know if that's a thing, but as the Hare Krishna movement. So a lot of the stuff they do is exactly the same. For example, this came up when I was at Kalachandji's. The Hare Krishna movement believes that the food that they serve at their restaurants and things is prasadam, which means it is food that is first offered to God, to Krishna, and then we get to eat Krishna's leftovers. So anytime you eat at a Hare Krishna restaurant, you're getting prasadam, you're getting food that has been ritually offered to Krishna, and then you get to eat the leftovers. So that's what they actually say, the leftovers. And in a Zen temple, we have exactly the same ceremony. I mean, there's probably some cosmetic differences, but I've watched the Hare Krishnas do their offering of food to Krishna ceremony, and I've watched and participated in the Buddhist ceremony of doing it to Buddha, and it's pretty much the same. You take a little, whatever you're fixing, whatever food you're cooking for everybody else, you take a little bit of it, you put it in usually 3 bowls, and you put it in front of the statue of Buddha, if you're a Buddhist, or the statue of Krishna if you're a Hare Krishna, and then you do some chanting and do some incense stuff, and then you take it away, and then after you've done that ritual, you eat. And so we in Buddhism follow exactly the same ritual, and it's quite interesting. And a lot of the rituals, the waking up early in the morning and all this other stuff, they're all really, really similar. The other thing I wanted to talk about in this video is belief. So the Hare Krishnas have some beliefs that I personally couldn't accept. When you're talking about this literal, taking all these scriptures as literal truth, I couldn't do it. I've talked about this before. The thing that really sort of burst the bubble for me, or one of several things, was after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster happened. I happened to, like a week later or a few days later, go to the Hare Krishna temple for their Sunday worship service, and the guy there, whoever was the leader, gave a lecture, And in his lecture, he talked about how, well, he talked about the space shuttle tragedy, and he used that as a way to get into this idea that the astronauts who had supposedly landed on the moon didn't really land on the moon, because according to the Hare Krishna scriptures, which are literally true, the moon has all these demigods living on it and cities and all this stuff. And when the astronauts went there, they didn't find any of this stuff, and it's got breathable air. That's according to their scriptures. The astronauts didn't find any of that stuff, so therefore they must have mistakenly landed on a different planet. This is what this guy actually said, as if they could act mistaken. Like, how that mechanism works, that they mistakenly landed on a different planet, I don't know. Maybe he's watching Lost in Space, or one of those shows where people do kooky stuff like that. Where planets are like right next to each other, like a McDonald's is next to a Burger King. But no, it doesn't work like that. But anyway, that sort of blew the whole thing up. But so the reason I bring that up is the matter of belief. So when you talk about religious movements like this, it's easy to make fun of their beliefs if you're like one of those kind of cynical people. It's easy to look at the Mormons and say, oh, they believed in Joseph Smith, he's obviously a con man. Or to look at the Scientologists and go, oh, they believe DC-10s deposit souls in volcanoes and stuff. There's a whole South Park episode that goes into the supposed beliefs of the Scientologists, and you can go, oh, those guys are dummies, right? Well, the thing I've noticed about that is I think for a lot of people, those beliefs are secondary. I mean, there's the real hardcore fundamentalists who really do believe that stuff. But for the vast majority of Scientologists and Mormons and Hare Krishnas, this is my speculation, so take it as you will, but I think for the vast majority of them, that stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about that belief. They don't really sit around like believing all this stuff all day and all night. What they're drawn into it for is other things. Like for the Mormons, there's a great social support system and a great support network, and people really do help each other, and that's, I think, really a big appeal of the Mormon movement. The Scientologists are probably similar in that way, and the Hare Krishnas are definitely similar in that way. The big support system. You're drawn into this big family of love if you become a Hare Krishna member, but you have to sacrifice a certain amount to join that family. You have to acquiesce to the practice and the discipline of it. So I think that's really interesting, and there's no way I'm going to get into all the areas you could talk about of it, but I think it's really fascinating. I did have one friend, and I'm going to reach out to her and see if she'll talk to me on the video channel, because it might be interesting, but she actually went around the same time. We were both at Kent State at the same time, both going to the Hare Krishna temple, together and stuff, and what she did is she went off and joined the movement for about, I don't know, a year or two, and then came back really disillusioned by the whole thing. So her story is quite interesting, and maybe I can see if she'll tell it, but I don't promise. Anyway, this video has gone on way too long, but I just thought I would share that with you because I think it's interesting, and I hope you found it interesting, and it's really not that much to do with Zen, so sorry. Anyway, if you want to contribute to me being able to buy more Hare Krishna food and maybe even more Hare Krishna books, you can go to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living. So I appreciate your support, but as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta spend money on me if you don't want to. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, are you glad I came back from Dallas? Are you happy that I'm here again? We can cuddle and go for walks and everything. Yeah, you want to go back inside though, I can tell. Alright, we'll go back inside.